Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the C.I.C. Lounge. I'm Peter.
I'm Jen.
And today, we're going to go off track just a little bit. We're not going to be talking about Star Trek. We're going to be talking about...
Demolition Man. One of Peter's favorite movies.
One of my favorite movies. Absolutely one of my favorite movies. But don't get me wrong. Don't get me twisted. I know this movie is terrible. But that's one of the things I love about this movie.
You know, I saw it a couple of days ago, and I'm like, this is awful. And then I watched it again for the purposes of taking notes, and I'm like, it's actually not as bad as I thought. Like, there's a lot of stuff that really works well in this movie. There's just elements that were just really poorly executed.
Yes.
And I think one of the things, like, the overall plot, structure, premise really works very well. It's a good story. But the flaw in the writing is really in that future dialogue. It just makes it really hard to watch because
have a joy day.
Right, because it's vernacular that's so alien that it comes about in such a short amount of time, from 1996 dystopian LA to 2032. Like, that's really not that big span of time.
No.
Like, people's languages don't change that dramatically.
And like outlawing physical touch, outlawing salt of all things, salt. Anything that's bad for you is illegal.
Anything that feels good is illegal.
Our society today would not function at all in this utopian society.
No. So I did a little bit of digging into the background of the film, and so this is one of these stories it was a screenplay written by an emerging screenwriter who then went on to be a producer, so he didn't really do much in screenwriting after this. Sells a script to Warner Brothers, gets paid, walks away. And then Warner Brothers takes this script, sends it into development, so another screenwriter comes along and then rewrites it, But they retained enough of the original story that the original screenwriter gets the story credit, and that was Peter Lenkov. So Daniel Waters gets the credit for the screenplay because he did a lot of heavy lifting and rewriting the story. And we were talking about some of the elements in this film that kind of didn't land well, and we're going to talk about the 3 seashells.
Ugh.
So the origin of that...
I use those all the time.
The origin... I'm not sure why Daniel Waters wanted a bathroom gag or something, but he calls up a buddy screenwriter of his who happens to be on the toilet in his own house at the time, because apparently you guys answer the phone when you're on the crapper.
And this was before cell phones were like everything
this is like
every day.
Early 90s.
Cell phones were like this big.
Right. So the guy's in the bathroom on the toilet, like, answers the phone or whatever, and they're like, he's asking, like, oh, I need something in the bathroom, something kind of futuristic. And the guy's literally looking around his own bathroom, and there's a bag of seashells on the back of his toilet. They're just decoration. He's like, well, I got this bag of seashells. I'm going to use that. So that's the 3 seashells in Demolition Man. There is no further story plot, like, function than it was that.
It was a shitty gag.
Right. I see what you did there. Yeah. So, like, this is things that, like, annoy me as a screenwriter and as a filmmaker. Like, if you're going to go so far as to not only make reference to something once, but several times in a movie, like, carry the thought through. Actually have it, like, mean something, but it doesn't. No. It's just stupid boy humor, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%.
It's just like...
It is male potty humor at its finest.
Right. And it's just like... Fine. And this is probably why a lot of women don't necessarily enjoy being drugged to action movies, because it's this nuanced stuff that's like,
I don't know what
seriously?
you're talking about.
Seriously? Okay.
You sure about that?
So I thought you would appreciate the backstory of the 3 seashells, because I thought that was pretty typical. Like,
I love it.
Totally written by a guy.
I didn't know that, so I really appreciate you letting me in on that little secret.
I will say the best dialogue in this film is delivered by Dennis Leary.
Oh, hands down.
And Dennis Leary was brought on specifically for his comedic rants.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote his own lines, or at least
Ad-libbed his
the
own
good
stuff.
ones, and they had to go through studio approval, which was kind of an agonizing process.
Oh, he wasn't just
No,
spitting
like
on the fly.
it was scripted, but he scripted them.
Oh.
And I remember when I first watched the movie, I'm like, this dialogue is terrible, but how come Dennis Leary's lines are so fantastic?
He did it himself.
It's like
he actually
different
put thought
writer.
into that.
That's but to be so in tune to a movie, to recognize when someone else is writing it, someone else wrote that line, not the one who wrote the whole thing, but that's someone different. I think I was kind of impressed with myself that I picked up on that. Like, so.
Wait, you don't want to run through the streets naked, rolling in green Jello?
No, but that sounds like something Dennis Leary would not just say, but do.
Yeah, going back to what you said about the whole like 30 years, 36 years or whatever it was, even as a kid, when I went to see that movie in the theaters, I didn't get that part because it's like the police chief is older. Like he was clearly in his 20s or 30s when when John Spartan was put under cryo freeze. So he's lived through all this stuff. And Zachary Lamb, the pilot, the snot-nosed rookie pilot, he I mean, he looks older than the police chief, sure, but he obviously remembers everything. So I mean, he would have been a few years older than the chief himself. So it's like, why are all these older people have they completely been brainwashed?
Well, that would be how I would solve the issue if this were my story. But this actually did come up in story development. There was another screenwriter who had come on who made uncredited changes to the script, including the opening prologue where we see John Spartan blowing up the building and his fall, because that wasn't in the original script.
Oh.
The original script had Spartan waking up in the future. And they added that part to show the difference between what was and what is, so you could so the audience can get a greater understanding of what's going on.
I'm glad they did that.
And this particular, I believe it was this uncredited screenwriter who had suggested you need to move it further forward into the future because it's not really believable. But the studio really wanted to pull on the thread of John Spartan and his daughter. But
they never
But that storyline eventually got cut for pacing. So there's just elements of it left in certain scenes, but they never actually tied it up. So they actually had a problem in screen test because much like me, I was watching the film. Okay, he has this daughter he doesn't know is Sandra Bullock's character, his daughter, and then they're about to go into this sex scene, and I'm like, I don't think she is, because I don't think they would have gone this far. Like. But again, there's a weird comedy thrown in, so maybe, I don't know. But no, it was never intended for Sandra Bullock's character to be perceived as John Spartan's daughter. It just kind of came across that way because of her nostalgic interest in 20th century pop culture and whatnot, and how she has this rough streak relative to everyone else who's grown up in this utopian society.
So was the scene where she gives John tells John that she's found his daughter, like she's found the information on his daughter? Was that
she doesn't actually find the information. She's about to like hack into the computer and go find it, and he tells her don't do that.
Yeah, that's right, because she said it might be a slight overreach of my
But she didn't end up doing it. So
right.
And then and that's one of those things that frustrates me in films, is that if you're going to start a thread, you need to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So like they have this, they clearly reference this, and I'm like, and I was watching the edit, and I'm like, they could have cut those two references to his daughter out, and the audience wouldn't have known.
No.
And there wouldn't have been any confusion. It really would have been rather simple to do that, but for whatever reason, they left those elements in. And I guess it would have made sense to leave those in if the intention was to do a sequel right after. But here we are. It's 2023. This film came out in 1993, and there's still no sequel. Although rumor has it, in 2021, Stallone did make a reference that there's one in development. But it's Hollywood, and that's
Yeah.
always the case.
Yeah.
There's always
always something in development.
Yeah, like whether it comes to fruition, who knows? But I don't know that a sequel to Demolition Man would be as successful as probably a reboot or a reimagined version of it. Because, like I said, the plot, the premise, there's really good material in here. Like if you just had it as an action film, but the comedy, like at times, I felt like the film had a bit of an identity crisis because it felt like now we're gonna be a comedy. And then we're going to go back to the action, and now we're going to be funny again. It's like, you can have comedy in an action, but sometimes I felt like the comedy was just a little too over the top for the genre of really being an action film.
And are we going to go into a society where we say everybody's full name?
John Spartan. Lenina Huxley.
Zachary Lamb.
So, interesting, in reading about the film, they say that this film draws its influences from Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. And I could never actually find if Lenina Huxley's last name was actually an homage to Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. But, having read Brave New World and having seen Demolition Man, I can see where the elements of that utopian society were kind of pulled a little bit from Brave New World. Not quite to the extent. Brave New World has a lot to do with like genetic manipulation, which comes into play, like you were talking about earlier, are people brainwashed. Basically, anyone born after a certain point, it comes out of a laboratory or a vat where their genes are scrubbed and sanitized. And we've established in this film that if you're put in cryo, you can basically be reprogrammed, which is the case of Wesley Snipes' character learning, all these new skills while he's in cryo to come out as a way more of a badass villain than he was when he went into cryo.
Comes out stronger, speaking several languages,
exactly,
being able to code and break codes, and
so it stands to reason you put on that little helmet thinking you're about to go have some sex with your partner, and you're reprogrammed.
Yeah.
So there is some merit or some thought that like people who were adults in the 90s who were part of this dystopian society could have been reprogrammed to be more amenable to the new order in 2032. And they wouldn't necessarily be the wiser. They wouldn't know that they'd been reprogrammed.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, you're putting these people into cryo sleep. And you're manipulating their brain waves because John Spartan comes out knowing how to crochet and knit, and so
he's a seamstress.
He's a seamstress. That's all he thinks about. I could do a bob and a weave, and I don't. So that would stand to reason that on a limited capacity via TV or radio waves, you could manipulate the populace into becoming a more docile, society.
easily controlled.
Yeah,
easily manipulated, and that's sort of the vein that I would think, like if you were to retell the story today, that part of the story would probably be amplified, so that when Spartan's character wakes up and sees this, he would recognize the programming for what it was because he wasn't brought up in that. That would show the difference between that 1996 war-torn LA to this utopian society. Whereas if you're like the frog in water that's slowly brought to a boil, you aren't aware of the changes until it's too late.
Yeah. Well, speaking of rebooting or reimagining this movie, what would you do?
Honestly, I would totally flip the script. I would make the protagonist a female character, female action hero. I would add a lot more character development and vulnerability, like to really appreciate the loss. Like even in that dystopian LA, like John Spartan's character, he had a wife, he had a daughter, and you don't really see him grieve the loss of that.
Not even for a second.
And how much he was acting in the service of the police department when all hell broke loose in the opening of the film. Like, he really shouldn't have been held at fault. And he was sentenced to 70 years in cryosleep. So by the time he woke up, his daughter, we don't know how old she was when he went in, but she'd be an old lady if she even lived, and wife would probably be gone by that point. So they took everything from him. And then they thaw him out and expect him to just get right back to work.
Yeah.
And I would think there would be a lot more struggle, a lot more resistance in that, even with his strong call to duty. Because like you literally went to sleep one night and the next day everything you knew changed. And I would add more nuances. Like it's really hard to rally behind plastic faces. So in this utopian society where everybody's sort of mundane, brainwashed, everything's kind of the same, it's really hard to rally behind that. And I would have probably brought the Edgar Friendly character up more.
Oh yeah,
Dennis Leary's character, probably had him be more of a focus rather than the Sandra Bullock character, because I think she was too much of a rebel for the world in which she was brought up.
yes,
Her behavior, her mannerisms really don't fit like this society. So those are some of the changes that like I would make, just to change that. But the story of a person pulled out of time, put into a new reality, and having to both deal with the grief and loss of their original life and cope with the new and the dangers and the differences of a brave new world and what that would look like, and how do you actually integrate into that. So I mean, and I get it, the seashell thing is kind of an example of, a change in technology or a change in culture and whatnot. In that case, I didn't think it really landed very well, though.
No.
So those are some of the things I would change.
I'd want to make it darker.
Yeah.
I enjoy a nice action movie just like anybody else, but I'd want to make this one a little bit more serious, a little darker. Keep some of the comedic elements, absolutely, but just show you have such a bright and shining society, and we see hardly any of the underbelly of it. I mean, we get what, two scenes of the underbelly of San Angeles when they go underneath to find Edgar Friendly. And the first one is when Simon Phoenix goes underground to find him. And yeah, it's just, it wasn't even that dark. I mean, it was more comedic in that scene too, because he goes over and he gets a burger, and Sandra Bullock's like, just don't ask where the meat comes from.
Right.
It's a rat burger. It's the best rat burger I've ever had.
Right. I think there's like that's where part of the film really gets interesting, seeing the difference between the underground and the overground. And I would have liked to have seen a lot more color in the underground, because on the surface everything's clean, sterile, and almost black and white, And I gotta hand it, production design did a really good job. The costumings were great. General Motors loaned them some spec cars, some from their concept library, so the cars they were driving around were on loan from General Motors, So
fun.
So that was kind of cool. So there's a lot of like stuff that really worked in this.
GM uses capacitance gel to run their cars.
Well, that part's totally made up. That's techno bobble, but no, like to show the difference in how these two different societies exist and coexist. And there, I agree. There should have, like, these things that keep popping up out of the ground. What are those?
From my understanding, they're basically telescopes that Edgar Friendly and his crew are using to be like, can I see? Oh, there are cops! Quick, go back down.
Like
they might talk us down from doing something.
It seemed a little.
Much.
I was very confused about that, because it seemed like that's like pretty sophisticated. I mean, I realize they live underground, but
yeah, how are they drilling holes? Are there pre-existing spots?
I that part was really strange to me, and I couldn't figure out, is this part of an automated system that they've tapped into, or like, I don't know. I was really confused. And then like the graffiti shows up and then it instantly disappears.
Yeah.
Like before anybody can even see it, it goes away.
But everybody freaks out when the machine starts the graffiti machine starts fizzing out and popping sparks. Oh my god, it's pandemonium.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the movie because it's just dumb fun. I think Stallone reloads his gun once, when he's shooting his 9mm. He does reload the double barrel shotgun, but that's more for dramatic, not suspense, excuse me, dramatic visual effects or whatever I'm trying to say. Sorry. You know how it is. You blows the bad guy's head off and you got to reload. So you snap the shotgun down, pull the caps out and put new rounds in. I'm just saying words. I don't even know what I'm doing.
Well, that brings up an interesting thing that a choice that they took in this movie. Like the title obviously is Demolition Man, and it came from, I believe, the original screenwriter, Peter Lenkov, had a tape stuck in his car, and it was like that song was on loop. So that's sort of where the where the title came from.
Demolition Man.
I mean, and as far as like titles for an action movie goes, it's great. That really nails it. But like Stallone's character in the opening, like he bungees out of this helicopter, which was a pretty elaborate stunt for the time. Bungees out of this helicopter solo to go into this huge building to look for Phoenix, to look for the villain, the bad guy, by himself, and he gets into trouble by himself. And one would think that if he'd had backup, if he'd had other people there, he might not have had to be sentenced to cryo. Yeah. Like there would have been other people, other witnesses, other clarification.
But Jen,
I realize that
you have to send a maniac to catch a maniac.
Okay. So throughout the film, he's kind of working with Sandra Bullock's character and a couple of the other police lackeys, to try and track down Phoenix's character. And then as we're coming into the climax of the film, like Stallone and Bullock are like going into like the lair of doom or whatever, and they're kicking ass. And like, okay, how does Sandra Bullock's character in a society that has no guns, it's like suddenly she's an expert shooter.
Oh,
she pulls the gun and it looks like she's gonna shoot him, but she shoots past him to the guy,
marksman.
The bad guy. Like she's a marksman. It's amazing. But she handles herself well in hand-to-hand combat. She proves that she can handle a gun. But right before they're about to go face the big baddie, he knocks her out.
Yeah.
And he goes in alone. That is another thing that I would change. Like if I were writing this story, it's like if he goes in with backup with a team, like he doesn't have to go it alone. I think that would have been another, full circle coming around, learning a lesson. Like the main character learns something by going through this, that, maybe if he, if Sandra Bullock's character had gone in, the building wouldn't have burned down or something like it, but then it wouldn't be Demolition Man. And that's the whole point. But,
and Stallone was like, this was part of his apex of his career. Like he was,
I get it. It's, no one wants a female sidekick coming in and stealing the thunder of the, the big burly action hero. At least in 1993.
No, definitely not.
Today, I think an audience wants a little bit more nuance, a little bit more development, a little more depth to their characters. They still want explosions. They still want car chases and fight scenes and all of that. But
and add a little more reloading of guns.
A little more realism.
And the cryostasis chambers, like I would absolutely re-envision those.
They seem very impractical. Oh, like in these half cylinders things where you can't lay down, you can't sit up, you're just sort of pretzeled in there.
They're literally giant ice cubes.
And there's something about this that really doesn't make sense to me. How long does the reprogramming take? And if you have the ability to reprogram somebody, why cryo-freeze them in the first place? Like, it seems to me if you're going to put someone on ice, there's a lot of energy, a lot of maintenance, a lot of monitoring, a lot of money to keep someone on ice for 70 years, is in the case of Stallone's character. Like, if you can reprogram him in a couple of days or even a couple of months, like why freeze him at all? Just medically sedate him, put him in a coma, reprogram him, and then wake him up. Like there's a lot like to be considered about that. What is the purpose of freezing him for so long? Why does he in theory, according to them, like he's not supposed to have any memory. He's not supposed to recognize the passage of time. So he wakes up the same person he went in unless you reprogram him. But as in the case of Stallone's character, he says that no, he actually did have some sense of the passage of time while he was in that. He was basically in a 30-year nightmare.
Yeah.
Which goes against what policy is or what the messaging is. But so there's a lot to ask about, like, what is the value served, or what is the purpose of freezing them in the first place? What the benefit of cryo freezing versus
Keeping them out of society?
Well, you can do that but with a conventional jail.
Yeah.
You know? And one of the other things I thought was interesting was that Stallone's character was charged and sentenced to 70 years. And Snipes' character was up for parole like 29 years later. So, like, Stallone's supposed to serve this really long time for not really doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And Phoenix, who's a notorious criminal whom Stallone's been chasing, John Spartan's been chasing for 2 years, basically gets an effective slap on the wrist by comparison.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a couple of questions about, like, well, okay, I get it for the purposes of taking a man out of time. I mean, I understand that you need the plot device, but if we're actually going to look at, well, why are we doing it this way?
How many years do you think? So if we kept that aspect of the story in, the cryogenically being frozen for X number of years, how many years would you make it that the police in the future would have to do what they did? Bring a maniac out of cryostasis to catch this maniac who's been released or escaped, excuse me.
For me, I would say you would have to go far enough into the future that there's no institutional memory. So no one is alive to tell you how it was back in the day. There's no memory of it.
Yeah.
You know, so I would say at least 100 years. That would give you enough time where you only have digital records and you can only look at a record of something and understand it and interpret it from your own experience. And if your own experience is a utopian society, then you're going to look at material from pre-utopian society and be, you know, revolted by it, you know. So I would think, you know, obviously in this case, like 30 years is not enough, not nearly enough time, because too many people are still alive who remember how things used to be and who would want to live as the way things used to be. People aren't giving up kissing. They aren't giving up sex, and they certainly aren't giving up salt. So. Oh, and I did look into it. Taco Bell won the franchise war because Burger King and McDonald's didn't want to be part of the film.
Oh.
I also learned that when they released the film in the UK, they had to go into post-production and change Taco Bell to Pizza Hut because Taco Bell isn't well known in Europe. At least in 1993 it wasn't.
So they had to do like a slapdash CG job on
all the Taco Bell logos and change it to Pizza Hut.
Well, I mean, if you're dubbing over the dialogue, it's easy to just say Pizza Hut rather than Taco Bell.
Yeah.
I guess that works.
I thought that was kind of funny.
That is pretty funny. Well, I think that we should work on recreating the script.
I think there's merit. I would probably just take the basic premise and then use my own title, my own log lines, like just take the basic story structure and reinvent it that way. That way there's no copyright or whatever. I mean, it's a concept, it's an idea. It's basically a cop story set in the future with a person out of time. It's certainly been done in other genres in other ways. So
easily done.
Not to infringe on whatever Mr. Stallone and the studios that be whatever they may be doing with the franchise or with the Demolition Man saga. So
I hope they don't do a sequel, because I think a sequel would be terrible. I mean, what would you do?
I don't know what you would do because so much time has passed. You know, like, you know, if you set it in real time, you know, what are we talking? 30 years have passed. So Stallone or John Spartan's character is 30 years older now, been living in this utopian society for probably almost as long as he was living in the pre-dystopian society. So for him, life has now reached a new normal. but where do you go with
Yeah.
that? What's the threat? What's
Well,
the, you know?
Did they do what he said? You get a little dirty, you get a lot clean, and somewhere in the middle you'll meet.
Presumably that's what would happen, you know, because the architect of the Brave New World died.
Yeah.
So there's nobody who really wants to fill that vacuum. At least in the way the movie ends. There's no successor coming in. The successor is the Edgar Friendly and John Spartan's influence. Like, so it looks like that whole society would implode into something new. But going with that, like I said, Stallone himself is just that much older. Like, is he still the action star? Like, did him and Sandra Bullock's character like have a kid, and that kid's the new hero of the film? Like, I don't know. Like, you could have done a sequel in the 90s that would have made sense, where he finds his daughter and there's a new threat or whatever. Like, some underling comes up, you know. But to do it with any semblance of the same cast, like, I don't know what that story would be. And I don't know that I could. I mean, I suppose there are smart writers out there who could come up with something that might be brilliant. But I would rather see it just rebooted or reimagined than a sequel to it. Could be a series. I could see a series of Man at a Time, and then you spend a 10-episode arc where he's trying to figure out what those seashells do.
We want credit if somebody's going to work on that.
I got a few ideas for that if we want to go the series route. So series is my jam.
Well, it's like everybody's turning movies from the 90s and the early 2000s into TV shows these days.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia, and if it's done right, it can be very successful.
Yeah.
So no, I think there's a Demolition Man series potential for sure, and I think that would be far more interesting than some sequel.
Oh yeah.
Set with some weird story that some studio executive thought would be good. I don't know.
And that way you can really draw out like what happened in the past to create this, war zone in LA or whatever city they want to put it in. His trial, why they thought he should be sentenced to this, insane sentencing, and then everything that happened in between. And then to get to the story of him saving this.
Well, I mean, you would start your pilot with all of that prologue, with all that setup, and then end the episode with him waking up in the future.
But you definitely
in a world that he doesn't know. But there's a lot that you could do with that, and a lot of you can have your big bad at the end of the season, something that he's pursuing throughout the season, but then you could really play with the lost daughter, or if it's even further in the future, he's just looking to connect with somebody from his family, some descendant, like, because I think there's a strong pull with that too.
Yeah, is this
like just some
granddaughter, great grandson? What?
I think humans are wired to connect, and I think that would be a natural instinct to want to connect with some part of your past in the future. So yeah, I think actually there's a good series potential for. It's basically a fish out of water. You've got this guy who's used to a brute force approach to things in a society that's very fragile. It's very delicate. It's very clean and hands off and don't touch. And I think that would be fun to see in a series.
Well, I like it. Get on it.
We're available.
Well, yeah, like I said before, this is one of my favorite movies, and I've always loved it. Flaws and all.
I will say that Sandra Bullock is a better actress than this film.
Oh, yeah. We both agree on that one.
Yeah. she's really, I mean, I gotta hand it to her. Like, she did what she could with the terrible dialogue she was given. But yeah, there was a line at the beginning of the film by Wesley Snipes. I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached.
And then
of course the end, he loses his head, and it, cryos frozen and then shatters. I appreciate when they can bring a story full circle like that, like that sort of foreshadow moment. Yeah, that's about just Enhance your calm.
Enhance your calm.
Enhance your calm.
Oh,
I think I'm gonna try to use that more in everyday speech. I'm gonna try and bring that one.
the little things that they have on the walls whenever somebody cusses.
Oh,
the demerits or
the
whatever.
morality code.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. That was interesting. Of course, in actual 2032, you wouldn't actually get a printed ticket stub. It
No.
would just be a digital thing that's just auto deducted from your.
Yeah, because
I'd be
everything's
broke.
digital.
I'd be
Yeah.
broke.
Oh, I would be fucking broke. But I mean, it was another gag to go along with the 3C shows.
Yeah, and I mean I get it. I don't know. I don't think it was needed.
No.
It's just one of those. Okay, well, that's a creative choice.
But I will say this: it wasn't needed for the movie to move at all. But it is something that we have all talked about. Everybody who's seen this movie has talked about it for the past 30 years.
Yeah.
So the writer, he was smart by putting that in there.
I think the consequences for something like that would need to be higher than a single credit. And when you're talking about changing a society, where you start really putting in consequences for behavior that you want changed that are impactful. So in the case of that, putting these hall monitors, these audio monitors in place, like, what are they listening? They're hearing everything.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like 1984.
Big Brother is like watching and listening and taxing you when you break the law.
And they're in their homes too.
Yeah.
Oh, no, thank you.
Brave new world.
That's when I cuss the most.
Yeah. So
typically in the bathroom when I'm looking at myself. You mother.
Okay, you should probably see somebody about that. A professional, maybe.
And on that note,
well, that's all I've got.
That's all I've got. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please let us know your thoughts on this movie. If you liked it, you hated it, anywhere in between, what you would want to see changed and what you would want to see if they rebooted the movie. We'd love to read your comments, so please.
And if you've got a film or TV series you'd like to hear our thoughts on, you can comment as well, and we'll take that under advisement.
Absolutely. Well, this is us for today's episode of the C.I.C. Lounge. I'm Peter.
I'm Jen.
We'll see you next time, guys.